Becoming a reflective practitioner requires us to explore ways of generating knowledge, and one way to do this is through nurturing relationships that we have in our professional roles. Critical reflective learning is actually nurtured by such relationships, and therefore becomes a much more productive process. And what we need to consider is the nature of these nurturing relationships. Well, there are sort of key aspects that we consider. First of all, any sort of positive, constructive relationship is mutual for everyone involved. In other words, everybody benefits from it. There is, of course, openness in relation to the way people are interacting with one another, and within the domain of reflective practice, they also need to be challenging relationships, or in other words, critical but supportive. The relationships that we have in order to help us generate knowledge also need to be represented appropriately within the context that we're working. And perhaps fundamentally, relationships are defined most of all by the language that we use, the dialogue, and the context of the dialogue that we have with others. And we can look at this from the perspective of a simple chart where the increasing capacity of a reflective practitioner to be more self-directed in terms of their reflective practice, to develop their knowledge and to generate knowledge about their role, is in terms of the amount of time that they have within that role, and also the amount of time that they give, that they're able to give to the process of development, to the activity of learning. And for teachers newly entered into the profession, we can see that very much knowledge is much lower and therefore needs to be built. And therefore the activities that we have as reflective practitioners, as teachers in the classroom, is very much focused on developing the skills that we need to survive in those environments. And therefore it's very much directed by this particular need. But with time and with experience, and with opportunity to give to reflection and to learning, the teacher can become much more self-directed. Or in other words, learning is moving from being tacit to much more explicit, to being sort of very vague and unknown to something that we do know very clearly. And as we mature in our roles, we become much more intuitive in terms of the practice, the teaching that we're doing. And this is where we experience a level of emancipation as reflective practitioners. And the amount of knowledge generation that we can engage with and the amount of knowledge that we can develop becomes much greater at this level, because we're not focusing solely on surviving and developing our skills, but actually broadening and deepening our understanding of teaching and learning. So nurturing relationships is a very useful strategy for the reflective practitioner to engage with in terms of developing and generating knowledge. And we can see from the chart that it's with time that nurturing relationships can actually help us to develop as practitioners. And essentially, the relationships that we have with our students and the relationships that we have with colleagues in the work environment are those relationships which can help us become much more self-directed as learners and self-directed as reflective practitioners. And it really, as we can see from the chart, moves us from focusing on things purely like skills development to being much more intuitive and much more have a much more investigation stance. in terms of the teaching that we're doing. And self-direction then is quite powerful. With self-direction, self-directed learning, we generate knowledge in a way which is responding to our learning needs, and also is part of the responsibility of being a reflective practitioner. The individual teacher then is, when they're being very intuitive, very self-directed, is empowered to select what knowledge is powerful, what knowledge is useful, and to manage that knowledge in terms of application in the classroom, assessing the quality of that knowledge and how it's used. And perhaps the key thing to be aware of in terms of self-direction as a reflective practitioner is that motivation drives this whole process. As a teacher, as a reflective practitioner, if you are not motivated to learn, not motivated to develop, then reflection is not going to help that development at all. And therefore, independence is a significant part of self-directed learning, as well as the ability to set goals and to define what is worthwhile to learn, to focus on those particular aspects of experiences in the classroom, and then to look at those people who can support the process, whether they're colleagues or critical friends or others.